Story 1. My house sitting story. 2 months after my brother and his wife bought a new house, they had to go out of town and needed their cats fed. Their house and my office are both a good drive from my apartment, but only a few minutes away from each other. My brother said if I wanted, I could just stay over in the guest room, rather than driving among the 3 places. So I got the keys and instructions. I was staying there 3 nights, Monwed. Monday evening was uneventful until about midnight. I was lying on the living room couch watching Conan, with a cat lying on my chest. I started to drift off to sleep. The next thing I knew, I was standing in pitch black darkness. I completely freaked out. I had no idea where I was. I felt around in the dark and felt nothing. Finally, I realized there was a faint blue light coming from above. I moved toward it and then understood where I was. I was in the fucking basement. The light was coming through the basement door at the top of the stairs, which leads to the kitchen. Just enough moonlight made it through from a window elsewhere in the kitchen. I bolted up the stairs, turned on the kitchen light, and closed the basement door. I was terrified until I calmed down enough to come to the conclusion you probably already came to. I had sleepwalked down the stairs, after opening the basement door, which I know was closed. A couple of things are important to the story. The first is the basement. The house was very nice, actually more than they should have been able to afford. The only exception was the basement. I had only seen the basement once when I first got the tour. It was unfinished and was the one major thing they wanted to fix up. All they had down there were some boxes and the washer-dryer. I had no reason to want to go down there and had kind of forgotten it existed. The other point is that sleepwalking is kind of a thing in my family, almost an inside joke. My brother talked in his sleep constantly and would sleepwalk sometimes, and it always scared the hell out of me. The idea of people doing things in their sleep just creeps me out to the core, still does. My brother knew this and would tease me about it, so it was known in my family that I had this phobia. But as far as I know, I had never, ever sleepwalked until that night. The image kept playing in my mind over and over of me asleep, getting up from the couch, walking to the kitchen, opening the basement door, and shuffling down the stairs into total darkness. Creepy as all hell. Anyway, I saw the TV was still on in the living room, playing Wedding Crashers. I watched the rest of the movie, trying to laugh and think of the sleepwalking as a funny story to tell my brother. When I went upstairs to go to sleep in the guest room, I stayed asleep. That was night 1. The next morning, in the light of day, it didn't seem that scary. I texted my brother about it and joked around. All day I wasn't bothered one bit, but as I'm walking out of my office to my car, I'm overcome with this sense of dread. All of a sudden, the thought of going to sleep in that house, and maybe sleepwalking again, is scaring me. So I had a plan. I stop at the hardware store and pick up one of those rubber door stopper wedges. At the house, I jam this into the crack under the basement door and kick it in until it's as far as it can go. I test out trying to open the door, and it won't budge. Perfect. Later, I go upstairs and fall asleep. When I wake up, I swear to God I think I'm dreaming. I was standing in darkness again, but this time I know exactly where I am. The smell is the same. The concrete floor under my feet is the same. I look around for the light from upstairs, and it takes me longer to find it because it's farther away. Last night I was only a couple of feet from the stairs. This night it was maybe 10 feet. I run up and turn on the kitchen lights. I see the rubber wedge on the floor, a couple of feet away, as if tossed there. Again, I can't stop picturing myself sleepwalking. Out of the bedroom, down the stairs, trying to open the basement door. Bending down and yanking out the wedge, and then, again, slowly down into the darkness. I decided I was turning on the basement lights and they were staying on. I opened the door and flipped the switch to the basement stairway. I saw there was a main switch at the bottom of the stairs. To give you a quick sense of the layout, the staircase splits the basement into 2 parts. To the right is a small area with the washer-dryer, and to the left is the big open area. Anyway, I walked down and turned on the lights for the whole basement. That's when I noticed something I hadn't noticed when my brother gave me the tour. About 10-15 feet away in the big area, there was a door to what looked like a small closet. This door was closed but had no doorknob, just an empty hole, so it looked like it would freely swing open. I realized it was very close to where I had just awoken. Then a fucking freaky thought came to me. It was as if each night I was heading to the door, and getting a little farther each time before I woke up. As soon as that thought popped into my head, I booked it up the stairs again, left the lights on, and closed the door. I went up to the bedroom, but it took me forever to fall asleep. That was night 2. The next morning, Wednesday morning, I woke up late for work. I didn't think about the basement at all because I was scrambling to get ready. At work, though, I was still curious about what was behind the door, so I texted my brother and asked. He replied, "Wait, why were you in the basement?" I realized that when I texted him the day before, I never actually told him where I woke up. So I tell him I woke up in the basement, actually twice in a row. After a while, he sends this novel-length text about how the basement is creepy, not to go down there, etc. How they tried putting the litter boxes in the basement and the cats made a mess in the house because they refused to go down. How he volunteers to do every chore other than the laundry so he doesn't have to go down there. He says all this stuff, and it's surprising to me, because my brother never believed in the paranormal or superstitions ever since we were kids. I also realize he never answered my question about the door, but I let it go. After work, I get the same feeling of dread as I'm walking to my car. I don't want to stay there again, and I decide to fuck it, I don't have to. So I go feed the cats, get my stuff, and drive back to my place. I'm supposed to feed the cats one more time, so I'll stop over in the morning. As I went to sleep at my apartment, I was thinking of all the steps I would have to take to sleepwalk to the basement again, find my car parked around the block, drive asleep to my brother's house, etc. But this time, I sleep through the night. That was night 3. Thursday morning, I stop at the house as planned. I'm about to leave when I remember that the basement lights are still on. I don't even hesitate to go down to turn them off. There was something about being there in the morning that, at the time, made it seem fine. When I go down, again, that door without a doorknob catches my eye, and it also doesn't seem scary anymore. So, what the hell? Let's see. I walk over to it and I distinctly remember not feeling spooked at all, until I reach my hand toward the doorknob hole to pull it open. As soon as I do that, and I mean instantly, I feel this electric feeling like the air before a storm, and I imagine a hand coming through that hole and grabbing mine. It was like 0 to 60, going from no fear to being certain that something horrible would happen if I opened that door. It's hard to describe it other than that electric feeling. I booked it up the stairs and out of the house, so a month later I meet my brother for happy hour. A few drinks in, we start joking about me sleepwalking in the creepy basement. I say he never answered me about what's behind the door, and he says I don't want to know. Joking at first, but then insisting. Finally, he tells me, and I don't believe him. He's my big brother and has only bullshitted me about 1,000,000 times in my life. This was his explanation. The previous and first owners of the house had a teen daughter that used the basement as her bedroom. The door was to her closet, where one night she curled up, took some pills, and killed herself. The family was going to remodel the basement, but after tearing it apart realized they couldn't do it and had to move. That was why only the basement was unfinished, and why my brother was able to afford the place. The seller had to disclose a suicide happened in the residence. He said if I didn't believe him, to look up the market values of the identical houses on his track. I know how much they paid for their house, and it was way lower. He and his wife considered themselves rational people and figured it was a bargain, but didn't want to tell anyone. After they moved in, his wife was fine with the basement, but he grew to hate it. He apologized for not saying anything to me before I stayed there, but he never thought I'd have any reason to go down there. Now here's what convinced me, I said. Okay, the only thing that makes me kind of believe you is that the last morning I was there, I went over to the closet door. And at this point, I see my brother's face change, and I continued. When I went to open it, the air felt like, and at the same instant, I say electricity, and my brother says electric. At the same time, I saw his face and knew he was telling the truth. I've never stepped foot again in that basement, and I haven't sleepwalked since. Story 2. So there's this old bridge in my town that's supposedly haunted by a young girl who drowned in the river beneath it. If you came at the right time, you could hear her scream. When I and my buddies were in high school, we had nothing better to do than go ghost hunting. Being from a town of 6,000 people in good old southern Illinois, half of that being prison inmates and mental health patients, you have to get a bit creative to have any sort of fun. Anyway, we get to this bridge at about 3 a.m., and we sit there for a while. Nothing. About 20 minutes go by and we're all skeptical. Everyone's joking about how dumb this was or trying to creep each other out. All of a sudden, screaming. The most blood-curdling, high-pitched screaming you've ever heard. It wasn't just one scream either. It never stopped. It kept going even as we were driving away in our cars. But that's not even the worst part. And one of my buddies hightailed it back to the cars as soon as we heard the initial scream, because you had to walk a bit downhill to get underneath the bridge. Halfway back, we both go from sprinting to a dead stop at the same moment. I never asked him what he saw, because I saw it for myself. It was a girl running on all fours into the woods. I don't talk about this much because it gives me chills just thinking about it, and nobody ever takes me seriously. If you knew me in real life, I don't have the ability to lie. Just not there for me. I had always believed in ghosts because I was raised in scary movies and watching Ghost Adventures or TAPs. In a way, this was one of the best experiences of my life. To experience something like this is unlike anything else. Just knowing that maybe there is something after we die is comforting in a way. Since the incident, I have gone back, and am planning on going back quite soon, with people that have never been. I'll tell you more about my other experiences if there's any interest. Some strange things going on underneath that bridge. Story 3. This only happened a couple of months ago, but is the creepiest thing I have ever experienced. My mom and stepdad had gone on a holiday to the US for 3 months and I was home by myself. I had a friend come over for dinner and just a general hangout, and she didn't have her license yet, so I had to drive her home. It's around 11:30 p.m. when I get home. Pull into the driveway as the roller door is opening. I just happened to glance out my window and this guy is standing right there as I could reach out and open my car door. I freak out and speed into the garage so fast and start closing the roller door. While it's closing the slowest it's ever taken to close, I look in my revision mirror and this guy is walking up my driveway. He has deviated from a normal route and is walking towards my garage. The door closed just in time, I swear. I make a mad dash from my car through the connecting room into the house. The connecting room has 2 windows that don't have curtains on, and the guy is standing right the fuck there at these windows. I wasn't gonna hang around and see if he cared for a cup of tea, lock the house up and grab my dogs and try and reason that I was just overreacting when I hear the gate to the backside of my house bang, and I don't remember locking it, so any Tom, Dick, and Harry could walk in. Now this is the middle of winter in Australia and it's raining and cold. So the last thing I want to do is go out there and possibly get killed. So I just hootle up and pretend like nothing is happening, probably the dumbest move, and in hindsight should have called my dad, who lives 5 minutes away. I am thinking dumbass white girl that gets her ass handed to her in horror movies. Fast forward through a pretty much sleepless night to be greeted with this news report. I am not kidding you when I say that this is literally down the road. This is a 2-minute walk from my house. Half an hour after all that shit went down at my house, weird shit kept happening for the next couple of nights, like the power to the lights being shut off from the breaker box, not tripping. I called my dad around for that because I wasn't going to be that stupid. Story 4. My patient died on the wing I work on. She was terminal but not expected to go immediately. She was going to a facility with hospice after a fairly long battle with cancer. She was scheduled to go early the next morning. Her husband had planned on meeting her there. Everything was set up. She was in good spirits and her assessment was fine. Took her medications and said she was going to watch the news and then take a nap. An hour later, I go to check on her. I'm quietly checking her IV, making sure her stuff is in reach, moving her table, and then notice she was gone. Sitting up, holding onto the side rail. She honestly looked like she was sleeping, but no heartbeat and no respirations. Most of the time when people expire, their mouth drops open and it's very obvious. With her, nope. I had to call a coworker to confirm. I was expecting a wake-up, but she was gone. Attempted to contact her husband, who I couldn't reach, and started the paperwork. In addition to attending to my other patients. A few minutes later, I'm by the central desk and someone asks, "Where were you?" And I told them I was giving medication down the hall. I see two of the other nurses exchange looks, but nurses are weird, and since they didn't elaborate, I continue on my nightly duties. I'm at the very end of the hall doing some patient education, and the charge nurses come and get me. I assume the husband is calling back, but that wasn't the case. I have been caring for my other patients at the opposite end of the ward. There have been phone calls coming out of the deceased patient's room to the central station, several of them, no answer, just breathing. I mean, this has to be a prank, right? The phone rings. I look and see the patient's room number on caller ID. I walk into the room. The phone is neatly on the bedside table, TV is off, and the deceased patient looks like she is napping. I check the bathroom. It's empty. I'm going to leave the door open halfway, I say as I leave the room. No more phone calls. But the next hour, alarms go off in empty rooms. Call lights to come on for patients that can't move. An important piece of equipment died, and the dementia patient keeps complaining about the other patient that keeps coming into her room, loosely fitting the description of the deceased. Husband finally comes to the unit because he knew why I was calling. He spends a few minutes with her, and when he comes out of the room, he finds me and says, "She told me this morning she didn't ever want to go to a nursing home." Well, I guess she meant it. After that, everything returned to normal. Well, normal as far as hospitals go. Story 5. I used to work at a place that required to be manned 24 hours a day. The reason being is that I handled sensitive documents files, and if somebody needed this information in the middle of the night, I would have to fetch it for them or confirm that I have it. Anyways, security is kinda tight. Bars on windows, multiple locked doors to get to where I am. They would give me work to do during the night, but underestimated how quickly I could get it done. So like most nights, I finished my work in like 30 to 45 minutes and pulled out my phone and played games on our Netflix and browsed Reddit, since nobody else is in the building at night. So now it is getting to be the last third of my shift when all of a sudden I hear a door close. I look at the security camera and see someone walking down a hall towards my room. At first I thought it was just somebody that came in ridiculously early, so I turn around and wait for them to come in. But nobody came in, and the hairs start rising on my back. Now, this isn't a really big building, so I figure I'll find the guy wherever he is and start checking offices and storage rooms, but come up empty-handed. However, I do see that a fire door had shut. I go to try and rewind the camera, but the digital recording is password protected, and I don't know the password. Anyways, the whole thing freaked me out, the way the person was walking down the hallway, like a determined walk right to where I was. So I sit with my spine tingling for the last couple of hours of my shift, and finally people start coming in. My replacement shows up, and I tell her what I saw, and at this point, I figured I must have imagined the whole thing. I'm told to go home, and the manager and girl who replaced me would look over the camera. After getting home, I call my manager and ask what was on the camera. So they said that the video showed the fire door closing, but then the video froze for about an hour. The next thing it records is me reopening the door. Story 6. This isn't a story about ghostly figures or haunted houses or whatever. It's about living in a place for 10 years and feeling that place abruptly turns on you. Places have felt to them. The country around you has its feel that you get used to. I used to live on an old southern plantation turned horse farm. It was over 1,000 acres of mostly woods or pastures. One day I was walking, exploring with my dogs down one of the horse trails in the woods about 20 minutes away from the house and decided to randomly go off trail. Like a 90-degree turn, climb down into a spring, then up under an ancient barbed wire fence, and wander along for a while until I found 2 large limestone caves directly across from each other. Both entrances were blocked by a bunch of rocks haphazardly stacked on top of each other, but they weren't entirely blocked. I wanted to go inside, but common sense told me I didn't have a phone. Nobody knew where the fuck I was, what if a snake bit me or I broke a leg on the rocks, etc. So I just looked around the caves and found this awesome as fuck old knife that looked like someone had carved it from a deer horn. As soon as I picked up the knife, it was like the woods changed. If you've ever lived out in the country for a long time in the same place, you get a feel for it. My dogs got closer and clung to me. I felt distinctly unwelcome. I put down the knife, but that horrible feeling kept up until I was totally out of the woods and almost home again. I never felt comfortable alone in those woods after that. It was like one moment I'm happy and exploring, and the next I'm being watched by someone who very much hates my guts. I'm sure it could be explained as nerves or whatever, but I looked for the caves later but never found them, despite knowing exactly where I left the trail. I know that feeling of connection with the land. I used to be able to wake up and go outside and know immediately if something was wrong. A sick horse, a loose horse, people hunting on our land, etc. Nothing I can explain, just a feeling. Whatever I felt when I picked up that knife, it was hostile. That's probably my most unexplained experience. Story 7. I've had other weird things happen, but these two instances came to mind first. One night 2 summers ago, I woke up around 2 a.m. and was just about to fall asleep again, but didn't when I saw my brother standing in the doorway of my room. My door was open. He ran towards me at a very high speed and stopped with his face like a foot away from my face. I swatted my arm at his figure, and he slowly disappeared right in front of me. It was probably my eyes playing tricks on me, but it was still creepy. Last winter, I was going to my mom's house to say goodnight. I was helping her clean up her house earlier that day because she was going to move. I was at her house, then left to run a couple of errands, and then returned to say goodnight before heading home. I get to her house and walk inside, thinking she was asleep on the couch in the living room. She wasn't there. So I decided to go upstairs because maybe she was sleeping up there, nowhere to be found. I was a little weirded out, but then thought she was in the kitchen or the bathroom. I went back downstairs to check things out, and when I couldn't find her, I realized that I was in the house alone. Let me tell you, this house is over 100 years old, and there have been creepy things that have happened in there that I can't explain. Hence why I was scared in the first place. Man, I was freaking out. I called for my mom to make sure that she wasn't there and heard a weird cough choke in the basement. I froze and checked my phone and got a message from my mom's friend saying that my mom was over with her. I then noped the fuck out of the house and called my boyfriend so I could distract myself while I made sure that all the doors were locked. I was talking to my boyfriend while I walked around the house. The back door was locked. The front door was locked. The basement door is locked. When I was on the side of the house by one of our windows, something from inside the house slammed against the window, hard. It was such a loud sound that you'd think the window would have broken, but it didn't. I probably killed my boyfriend's eardrums with how loud I screamed. I hopped in my truck and got out of there. No one else was in the house with me, so I can't logically explain what I experienced. Let's just say that I'm glad that we are not associated with that house anymore. I hope whoever owns it now sees it as a happier place than my family and I ever will. Story 8. My friend and I time traveled, or that is the easiest explanation. We were in high school and he was taking my bus back to my house with me. We get home around 2:45 and my mother gets home around 3 o'clock. We decided to go hiking before my mother could say no, so we left a note on the counter and took off. We took our usual route up the backyard hill, making sure to avoid the crazy people that resided in makeshift homes up there. Climbed some trees for a while, explored a section of the car graveyard we hadn't checked out before, and other typical teenage exploring type stuff. We took a break near the top of the mountain. It was unusually beautiful that day. Incredibly green, and there were seriously visible light beams shining down through the canopy, like seriously pretty stuff. So of course I start running around through the light and decide we should probably start getting back because my mother was probably going to be pissed if we missed dinner. On the way back, we stumbled onto a pond we had never encountered before. It was small and had a single wooden boat on it. There were also a few teepees around the pond. Not old teepees. They looked ratty and unusable. We decided someone was probably living there and took a new path back home. We climbed down and up an old quarry and dropped off on the main road that leads to my house. We were filthy and over a mile from my place. We just walked the road back to my house. We arrived home before my mother, which seemed strange. So I threw out the note so she wouldn't know we were out gallivanting. She got home like 3 minutes later, wondering how we had gotten so dirty at school. She arrived home at her usual time, and we had only been gone a total of 15 minutes. We honestly don't even talk about that day anymore. It's too confusing. But yeah, time travel. Story 9. My friend, let's call him Jake, from time to time would tell us about how he'd often hear his home phone ringing early in the morning, always at around 5 a.m.-ish, and how it would wake him up only to ring for about 4 or so times before it would stop. He said it freaked him out because he couldn't imagine who would be calling at that time and why they would suddenly just stop. Also, how it pissed him off that he was then just awake. I'd assure him it was probably some automated scam call, trying to sell some crap or something. A couple of weeks would go by, and then Jake would tell me again about the phone ringing early in the morning. He'd make it clear that it couldn't be his mom or dad because they were in bed. Fair enough. A relevant point to Jake's story is that he had a disabled younger brother. Let's call him Dale. When I'd come round to hang out, Dale would always be with us, and he was great. He just wasn't able to communicate with you. He just kind of made noises. We'd throw something on the TV, hang out and eat cereal or something. Anyway, about the 6th time Jake complained to me about this phone thing. He said he managed to pick it up this time. I remember what he said. It's just a constant buzzing sound. I picked it up, held my breath and listened. Sounded like TV static or something. This kind of confirmed our suspicion that it was an automated call. I said if he'd listened any longer, it would have probably kicked in. And the voice trying to get you to throw your card details in would have blurred out. He put it down though, apparently. The next day he said it happened again, but before he picked it up, it had already stopped ringing. He picked it up anyway, hoping to get the caller's number, and realized the call was still live. The same buzzing noise, but he heard someone else on the line, shuffling around and breathing. Jake said he pretty much shit himself, proceeded to hold his breath again, and just listened. Said he'd never been more freaked out in his life. Said he listened for a good 15 minutes and came to realize that it must be Dale that had picked up the phone before him and was kind of talking to the buzzing noise. The buzzing would sound out for about 30 seconds or so, and then Dale would make the most intelligible, that the right word? Sounds he'd heard Dale make, almost as if he was responding coherently. After Dale would do this, Jake said the buzzing stopped for a second or so, and then would sound out for about 30 seconds, repeating the process. This went on for about 15 minutes before Jake said he went into Dale's room and put the phone down. We think Dale must have been picking up the phone and doing this every time Jake heard it ring. Jake's never heard Dale sound so coherent before and hasn't since. The phone calls have stopped now.
The end. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.